we are on the traditional territories of what we now call British Columbia, of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. Namely, I'm on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. REIBC is committed to reconciliation, building mutual beneficial relationships, respecting the unique history, diverse cultures, and outstanding contributions of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Now, today's webinar is brought to you by the BC Land Summit Society. Many of you will have heard of the BC Land Summit Conference that's held every 5 years, but for those of you who don't know, the BC Land Summit Society itself is a nonprofit society that's independently incorporated under the Societies Act of BC. The member organizations of the society are each professional associations in fields of practice related to land and land use. The member organizations themselves are the Appraisal Institute of Canada, the BC Association, the British Columbia Institute of Agrologists, the British Columbia Society of Landscape Architects, the Planning Institute of British Columbia, and the Real Estate Institute of British Columbia. And as mentioned, the BC Land Summit is held every 5 years, and it's the premier collaborative conference providing interdisciplinary education, professional development, training, networking opportunities for professional practitioners in fields related to land and land use in BC. And just a small plug, I went to the one in 2019 that was here in Vancouver, and it was awesome. It was a phenomenal event. There was over 800 people. It was cross-disciplinary, so you got to meet people all throughout the real estate industry. Really helped my network at the time, and even benefited my clients down the road. And the key piece too in terms of presentations there is that it really focuses on best practices across these fields, and there was a big technology piece that was incorporated, so great showcases across the board. And for many of the people on this call, I'm sure you need some CPD credits, so those are also available through the conference. The next conference itself, the BC Land Summit, is going to be held in Nanaimo, and as you can see up on the screen, it's May 8th through 10th. Excuse me. If you hear me cough a few times, I apologize. Kids are back in school, which means germs are returning home. Now, I'll start the discussion by giving Robert Madsen an opportunity to discuss his perspective. There'll be opportunities for questions at the end of his presentation, so I just ask that you put the questions in the chat field. There's a number of us on here. It'd be great to unmute and have people ask the questions, but it might take a bit too long. So let me start off by introducing Robert. So Robert Madsen grew up in self-storage, having been introduced to it at the age of 5 when his parents bought their first conversion facility in downtown Vancouver. Almost 40 years later, self-storage continues to be his passion and livelihood as he operates his small family business under the ULOC mini storage brand in British Columbia. Operating in communities big and small, he loves the industry and all things storage. He remains active in advocating for the industry and helping it evolve in productive and positive ways. He's currently president of the Vancouver Island Self-Storage Association and a director on the Canadian Self-Storage Association. He enjoys writing articles, presenting at conferences, webinars, sharing storage know-how, and contributing as a moderator on the industry's largest online self-storage forum for owners, staff, and vendors. He values the importance of giving back as a charter member of the Rotary Club of Steveston, and he looks fondly at his experience during an 8-year career as an airport manager for the Vancouver International Airport Authority. In his spare time, he loves spending time with his family and friends while participating in new adventures and travel. So Robert, I will pass it over to you to take it away.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you for that introduction. I will start up my screen here right away. Just a click of share. And let me hit the from beginning. So it should just be loading up here. And if you can just confirm that you can see that fine. Perfect. All right. Yeah, I just wanted to welcome the group that's turned out to hear a little bit about self-storage. I'm sure many of you have an understanding of how you see self-storage, and I'm just happy to give a little insight on how an insider sees self-storage and some of the things we see in the industry. So hopefully there's just some tidbits there that will jog some questions or pique some curiosity, or at least enlighten in somewhere that's different than maybe some of what you had understood in self-storage. So let's dive into it. So I wanted to quickly give you a point of reference of who owns self-storage. So in North America, where self-storage really has its strongest footprint worldwide, it does have a worldwide presence. I should note that you might be surprised at some of the players behind self-storage. So 15% of most storage facilities are institutionally owned or owned by large private or public operators. And in this case, some of the biggest players on that side are the gentleman you see in the middle, Bill Gates, and his business partners of the Walton family. And they've teamed up with an operational family that's been in the industry, that's been in the industry as long as I've known them, or I've been in it as well, and I've known them throughout. And so not too many people know that at different times, that duo of partnership has been some of the largest of the institutional groups. That's starting to change now as Wall Street comes into the industry. But this means that 85% of the business is owned by small family business operators, people in your community who have stumbled or inherited, or who knows how they got into the business, but have operated storage. And that means a lot of your interaction, for the most part, is going to be with local landowners in your local community. They're they build great product. They're keen in what they do, but they're not quite as sophisticated, and that can be good and bad. But they're just normal people in your community who decided to operate self-storage. And I think that that's probably most of your interactions. But it is good to know that there are some major players in self-storage in the industry behind the scenes. That's North America. So what you see there is approximately 60,000 self-storage facilities spread across the United States and Canada. Interestingly enough, the blue sites are the sites in planning and development right now. So there's a lot of self-storage facilities that are continually being brought onto market. I actually think that this will slow down. Many of these sites started planning in the low interest rate environment, and what I am now seeing is with the higher interest rates, many of these facilities may get shelves. They may not carry forward, or they may delay. And usually that creates a weird domino effect in the years to come. Of course, as things go through planning in a couple of years, something you don't see as many self-storage facilities coming down the planning pipe, but we're going to see how that goes. And as you can see, it's a heavy US industry. It matches with the population. I always see self-storage as about 10 times plus greater in the US. And of course, the population is closing in on 10 times greater. But you can see the Canadian representation is actually pretty good. You'll find, as I go into this next slide, and I've got, hopefully you can see this all fine. On one side, I've got the Lower Mainland, then I've got Mid-Island around Nanaimo, then the Pacific Northwest, and just for laughs, Las Vegas. And the reason why I did that is just to show where self-storage is located. And so self-storage operators love location. I know everyone wants to put us in the back 40, but it's a very competitive business. It has high barriers of entry to enter. You need a lot of land, and if you don't have a lot of land, you need the density on it, the proper zoning, and you do need money. It is a very large capital outlay to get into the business. And unlike most industries where you can pre-sell or get into cash flow quickly, unfortunately with storage, you build it, obviously through planning and development, and then you have to construct it, then you get the doors open, then you start renting, and your rent up curve can be fairly impressive if you've done good feasibility beginning. But of course, people start vacating as you start to fill too, right? There's a lot of short storage is month to month, so it's very short term if the user likes. And it takes a long time to stabilize. It can, in this interest rate environment and what we're seeing now, facilities can take easily 3 to 5 years, and in some cases 7 to 10, particularly in very saturated supply markets like particular markets of East Vancouver. But through COVID, mind you, I should mention, that's probably been our best years, our highest occupancy, our highest rates. And so it would be a mistake to plan off those years to think that would continue, because now we see normalization. And again, interest rates are slowing down some of the trends in storage. I put down that 1 in 9 households use self-storage in the United States. It's a US stat. The Canadian stat is similar, but maybe different because Canadians are different in our habits, but it's still pretty high. I would imagine most people on this call, a heavy concentration, if we were in person and I had you put your hand up, have used self-storage. Demand varies from 2.5 square foot per capita up to 20 square foot per capita. And that's actually why I put Vegas on there. Because if you look at the Vegas model, I don't know if you can get a good feel for it, but you can see there is a storage on almost every major intersection in Las Vegas. They've sought out the best locations. You literally drive by 5 storage facilities sometimes in 5 blocks easily, if not even more. And what happens is that's just the American consumerism, American business. The business just multiplies the demand for storage. Also, Vegas is a very transient society, so they use more storage because they're not always having a place to keep their stuff. But it was just a really good example. And, even areas I put Nanaimo in, you can't quite see Parksville. At one time, Parksville had some of the most storage per capita going in Canada, which was really weird, but it was really the retirement trend coming into the region, and they weren't sure where to house yet, so they were using storage. So storage, doesn't have to look like the row style buildings. This storage facility is in Mission, BC. Population in the surrounding area, and you have to go out a little bit, is probably right around 30,000. But you can see this was owned by this is a new group a new business partnership that started their own storage, just 2 guys, and they came from different industry, and they built a fantastic storage facility. So storage doesn't have to look like it traditionally has. And you can imagine that this is a really great high-end storage. It shows well. When you have all this great look, security features, it is really well accepted in the community. And more than 50% of our renters are women. So storage facilities aren't the most comforting places, just from a perception standpoint. You're in an empty building and it's creaking. So having the building look great and have great design and features that work well in the community, discourage crime, is awesome. So just a really good example. Scrolling ahead. Now, you'd be surprised the amount of businesses that use storage. So this is an interesting statistic, and obviously I'm an operator in storage. I get to see who comes. Generally storage facilities in the middle of the day, rush hour looks like 5 people. So I always laugh a little when I see storage projects being opposed in communities because of the high traffic that they're going to bring. That is not true. A storage facility does not bring a high amount of traffic per hour, but what it does bring is first thing in the morning, if your facility has security systems in place, we see a ton of business people and trades, and that is actually the rush hour we see. It's all the tradespeople who and small businesses, from coffee shops to plumbers to pharmaceutical sales reps, that have integrated storage into their regular life and operations. So we see a lot of businesses. I think on average, a facility like the one I just showed you in the previous picture, it does spin off about 400 employees from the people who rent. And of course, they rent because the terms are flexible. The access is really convenient. They're safe and secure. The facility can accept deliveries. And the businesses, if you're in a small business, you can adapt your storage space to your business cycle because it's just month to month. So you can flex up, flex down, super compatible. I should mention business clients like Save on Foods, Canadian Tire, Cactus Club, they all use storage. And amazingly, I was actually shocked at first how many of these groups use storage right after they opened a new building. And then they continue on. They're some of our longest longevity tenants that don't ever move out of the storage facility. Really strange, but I think it makes sense because of the cost. It's very affordable to have very efficiently used storage inside of a storage building, so that Canadian Tire can use their expensive retail space for sales and to move product. So it's amazing how many of these groups, despite how large the big box retailer is or the resources they have, they quite often find a storage location right nearby. Storage is very location specific too. People will not drive far for their storage locker. They want it close, and businesses are no different. Even if you have a massive sale or discount, if you're going out of the normal travel realm of a person, they're not going to want to go there. And that's why location is quite important. Residential storage, it's a huge driver of storage as well. I wasn't going to go in much into it. Obviously, though, sales cycles, renovations, all drive storage. No surprise right now with higher interest rates that came out. It's reducing some of the sales cycle or some of the sales demand on residential home sales. And we feel that in storage. And we actually look at it as sort of a normalization right now. Obviously, self-storage from a planning and land use, it can go into all different places. Here you can see a number of row-style locations, and they've squeezed into really weird pieces of land that wouldn't be conforming to a lot of other uses. But just an example of where storage can go. Again, as owners, we do like access, location, visibility. It's quite important. So we don't always like to be put in that back quarter, particularly in competitive market. It means that we probably won't be as competitive, and that will really hurt us on our financials. And just a couple more slides to go. Just today's storage, big and small. Some of these facilities are in Parksville, Abbotsford. One's in a big city as well, but you know what? They all share a very similar look and feel in modern storage facilities. Really clean floors, well lit, high security systems. Crime is not rampant on storage facilities, particularly when they've got the right features in place. It's actually quite a safe place to put your goods, and our tenants appreciate that. They know that it's a much better option. And then we also have specialty space and storage now too. So you are seeing a lot of boat and RV storage, specialized. This one's actually covered. We're doing a lot of conference rooms and co-work space where our business clients, all those business clients I mentioned, can actually hold meetings inside the office, conduct business, because they might be on the road all day. They're just getting inventory. They're coming back for inventory, taking deliveries, but they're also getting some work done on their laptop inside our facilities. So we've provided space in many locations. You can see there's a conference room in the Mission storage facility. It's quite professional and makes for a great meeting spot for sales reps. And then we've even got high-end wine storage starting to come into the market, but the demand is very, there's only so much demand per market, but wine does cost, and having the right conditions to store is appreciated. So there's a couple examples there of what we have and different things in storage and how we use it. And the last slide, I just wanted to mention that we do see differing trends too in land use and self-storage. Obviously, you can put these very simplistic box style stored spots down. I know from a planning and development, obviously, I don't think owners are seeking building permits and different things. So, that can be controversial in different regions, but sometimes that's the only way to bring storage in a community that has demand. And I did put up a couple other examples that we're seeing. We were seeing in Calgary, maybe not so much now, interest in putting self-storage inside office buildings or unused space that was purposed for other things. And so, for example, these are two storage facilities on the extremities of the picture in the United States. Obviously, there's still office space in certain floors, but there are floors that are fully refitted out and dedicated to self-storage because office vacancy is higher in these regions now, coming out of COVID in particular. It was already a trend happening before COVID. But we are seeing a different use of that property to rent it out and have activity, and it creates a good storage use where there's maybe no other way to get storage into those markets. So that's a super quick overview. I hope I filled in a couple gaps, but I think the main point I wanted to make was that self-storage is very beneficial in communities. It does drive the economy. It drives the small business environment. Businesses really do rely on it because it is hard to buy their own space to manage inventories, and traditional industrial space obviously is quite scarce. So storage works extremely well, and you'd be surprised how many hundreds of business clients we have at facilities, both mine and competitors across the province.
Very interesting. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah.
Just as a reminder to everybody who's joined us here, if you have questions, we're going to do a few questions for Robert here before we move over to Graham. So please put them in the chat. And just while I'm waiting for yours, I have one of my own. In terms of the clientele, you mentioned about the residential as well as the business. Do you have general percentages that you're able to share as to what that looks like for us in the Lower Mainland?
Sure, absolutely. So if you go into the suburbs, Richmond, Surrey, areas where you've got a higher residential population, it's not uncommon to see 30% of that a business clientele and the other 70% residential. But when you start to go into the nodes of the business sector, that flips. And again, not uncommon in a downtown sector to see 70% on the business side, 30% on the residential. And those facilities too, you know, if you were to observe the loading docks in the mornings, the amount of business activity is pretty impressive, and it far exceeds what you would typically see of residential activity. It's you can just see all the varied businesses that we go to every day and don't realize that they inventory in the core with storage because it is the cheapest, most flexible way to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. It's almost like their last mile storage, right?
That is exact. Actually, yeah, some of the big players in storage, guess what? They're getting into last mile logistics in because we see it. We actually see it in our customer interpretations, and obviously, it's getting harder and harder for businesses to
Yeah,
find good space.
nice. One more quick one here. In terms of office, you made a comment there at the end that in some of the markets where you've got high vacancy,
Mhm.
which we're not quite at the point of high office vacancy, but certainly trending that way. Wondering if you can comment on if you've run some models or numbers on anything on where are we? Like, is suburban Class D, is it ready to be converted to storage, or what do the numbers look like?
You know what? Definitely in the suburb and city center markets, you know, downtown Vancouver and a lot of areas, it's hard to get storage into. It's very expensive to build a whole storage facility. You know, I'm looking in Surrey, down King George, it's 70 million an acre, and there we just can't compete. But if we can get into a floor of a building at an economical negotiated contract or deal or joint venture, it can make a ton of sense because I can tell you one thing: the demand is already there in a lot of markets. It's just that we can't figure out how to bring storage into that market. So, you know, if you look at modern apartments nowadays, it's hard to fit a bike in there, and I am seeing large developments where there is no storage. There's not even underground storage. You know, and even the underground storage in buildings, it's you know, it's always questionable how secure that is. There's a lot of stories. Obviously, unfortunately, storage is very specific, and we work hard to secure the properties. So, yeah, you can see that going into different areas.
Nice. We do have one question here in the chat. It says, can storage be an economic or demographic indicator of future development needs?
Yeah, you know what? It's a tough one because I think it sort of goes at the same time hand in hand. Um, you know, obviously, if yeah, you know, in the United States, if you drive through rural United States, it's shocking how many storage facilities are there. And what that does indicate, because you're driving by farm fields for miles and miles, and it's a really weird phenomenon crossing I-5 into Washington State. But you know what? That's an indication of the business forward environment of small mom and pop people. So businesses, because they can't scale up, they're just doing their startup out of their garage, and they want to grow their business, but they cannot buy a bigger space. Storage demand does indicate. So if you go into rural areas and you see a high commercial content, or the operators exposing a high commercial content, that's an indicator of a community that really wants to grow on the business side and is a pretty savvy demographic, and they have the means to make it work, but they just can't afford a bigger, they can't do the full jump, and nor should they because of the risks of expensing too high in the early days.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a tough one on an indicator side because there are a lot of things that constrain storage to grow in a market, just between city planning and zoning and costs and cost of land. But it can definitely open an eye. The data is there, and it's if you can get to the data, interpret it properly, it can show some good strong growth and legs. And you'd be amazed at the major businesses that we see today that have become multinational or quite valued in their cash flow that actually grew through storage in the early days.
Really interesting. All right, well, we'll come back to questions here. I see there's a couple more coming in, but we'll turn it over to Graham, and then we'll wrap up with more questions for
Sure.
both of you
That's
after
great.
that. So thank you, Robert. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, we'll turn it over here to Graham Carter to provide his insights, and I'll just give you a little intro as to who Graham is. So Graham is an entrepreneurial executive specializing in construction, engineering, technology, and clean energy. And he's distinguished as one of Business in Vancouver's top 40 under 40. He currently works as a principal at Vertex Developments and Maven Consulting, two companies that he co-founded. At Vertex, Graham's project structuring skills and investment savvy enable the company to create imaginative multifamily homes for the Vancouver real estate market. At Maven, his utility engineering and construction consultancy services are relied on by utility partners on large-scale infrastructure projects. This work landed Maven as number 70 on MacLean's 2019 Growth 500 list due to its 5-year growth of 1,339%, which is impressive. Graham is a big picture visionary and proven engineering consultant. His winning entrepreneurial record also includes Aclaro Management Corporation and Axia Software Corporation, where he provided strategic leadership in the mid to late 2000s, leading to private equity buyouts in both cases. At Carbon Zero Holdings, where he was the CEO in 2011 and 12, he successfully corporatized a government-owned scientific organization, imbuing it with sales and customer-focused culture. So thank you, Graham, for taking the time and joining us today. And I will pass it over to you. And just a reminder to everyone, please add your questions to the chat for both Robert and Graham, and we'll get to them at the end.
Thanks, Keith. Appreciate the intro, and thanks everybody for joining. It's a pleasure to share a few thoughts, and thank you to Rob for his intro to self-storage. It's a very interesting business, and we've looked at it from time to time and never quite taken the plunge, but it's certainly whets the palate a little bit to think about it some more. So thanks for that. So today I wanted to, just like Sharona, who was on earlier, I'm from New Zealand originally. I've spent the last almost 20 years now in BC. So most of my, I guess my business career has been in BC, but originally from New Zealand, and I unfortunately never lose the accent, or fortunately. So what I wanted to do today was, as working in the development community, thinking about land, and we see a lot of discussions around land supply and opening up land and how do we develop land. And so what I wanted to do today was to speak a little bit about the experience in New Zealand, and kind of what that means for BC and what could it mean. And, on the call, we've got a number of professionals that work in land supply, appraisals, best land use. And I just really want to spend a few minutes and just talk about what's happened in New Zealand. It's a very interesting market. And I think there's some lessons to be learned, and I think just some warnings. And as we know, we need supply in our market, across the board in BC, like what should we not do as we push to open up supply at a political, governmental, and permitting level. The first thing I'd just say is that it's very interesting that New Zealand and BC are very, very similar markets. Population's almost identical, 5.2 in New Zealand to 5.4 in BC, roughly. Where both markets are primarily driven by immigration. A very diverse geography and topography in terms of types of land. BC, you've got desert through to rainforest, and it's exactly the same in New Zealand. If you ever watch Lord of the Rings, you can see kind of a diverse type of land that we have in New Zealand. And also really, relatively few metro centers. So in New Zealand, the biggest city is Auckland. BC, obviously, the lower mainland drives a lot of the economic drivers, but, the regions are very, very important. And so I think it's a very interesting market to analyze, to kind of take some lessons away from what's happened as we think about BC and opening up land supply and developing our province in a smart manner. So there's a few words on the slide, but just want to talk about what happened. We all remember this time in our lives where this thing called COVID happened. And before COVID in New Zealand, we had a very similar problem to the market here in BC, where supply and demand was mismatched. So in 2020, before our lives all changed, roughly about 10,000 homes a year, we had demand exceeded supply by about 10,000 homes a year in the market. So what did that mean? Well, of course, prices went up. We had a huge amount of affordability issues, like in the lower mainland market and on the island as well. And so, we're kind of in the same cycle. And I used to read the newspaper in the Vancouver Sun and then the New Zealand Herald, and it's all, you could literally copy and paste an article and be the exact same article in the market. But then obviously the world changed, and what happened in New Zealand is that the border got shut in the country. Now, I go to the politics of that. As a citizen, I could not go back to my home country for 3 years, and it was a very interesting time and frustrating for me. Couldn't see my family, but through that time, New Zealand was cut off from the immigration curve, and there was no immigration, no tourism. But like in BC, construction did not stop through that period. So what that meant was that we had a huge boom in construction. Houses were going up. Typically the permitting process in New Zealand is, start to finish is about 2 years for a single family home, obviously a little longer for a multifamily. But we had a huge growth. And what happened now has happened is that there's now a balanced market. Well, in fact, it's actually tipped the other way where we have an oversupply. So my slides are not being shared. You guys not see my slides? Is that working now? Apologies.
Yeah, that's working.
Apologies. I had some. Yeah. So sorry about that. So New Zealand has kind of gone through this change, and we had an undersupply to an oversupply. And what that meant is that they say now over the last 2 years, we've had a oversupply of about 60,000 homes. So what that has meant for the market is that actually the house prices have plummeted. So in 2022, house prices dropped about 17%. Now, obviously, high interest rates are similar to here. In fact, they're a little bit higher in New Zealand. So that's also impacted the market. And there's about another 5% decline going to happen this year. So while that's tough in a short-term basis, it's actually really balanced the market out. And the affordability curve is interesting because it's now much more affordable to buy a home. Zoom into Auckland, the biggest city in New Zealand. About 2018, they put in what they called a unitary plan across the entire metro area. So you think about Metro Vancouver having a common official community plan, OCP. So what that did was at a macro level, we created a great idea to create planning, but there's a number of nightmares that happen because you didn't plan at a community level, you planned at a regional level. And there's a lot of good, but there's some bad sides to it as well. And so that's what I want to talk about next. What we learned from Auckland with this, this unitary plan, and then a huge boom in construction, kind of 3 key lessons that we've suffered through and experienced. And the very first one is, development is not equal in all postcodes. Obviously the wealthy areas had almost zero multifamily development, and the lower socioeconomic areas had a very, very high influx of multifamily development. There's a huge amount of NIMBYism. I don't want to have a townhouse or an apartment project in my backyard. But, like in a lot of metro centers in BC, the valuable land is around the city center, and that's where you need your density. The second point is that density actually ended up in the wrong place because, again, planning happened at a regional level, not at a community level. And so I've got friends who live in a quiet cul-de-sac street. They've in a single family street, and they then had 2 monolith townhouse projects pop up on their street. Now in New Zealand, there's no underground parking. It's all parking at grade. And so you have 45, 50 families move into your single family street. First of all, there's no parking available on the street. There's no place for your kids to play anymore in the cul-de-sac to play basketball, rugby, hockey, whatever it might be. And you generally got a huge amount of congestion in an area that's not designed to have multifamily. So that's the second thing that has, I've got a lot of friends in a street where my grandmother actually used to live. It's crazy how you go there and there's just like 2 or 3 big monoliths buildings and everything else is a single family. And the third one I think is also very, very important is there's a huge amount of wasted land potential. And what I mean by that is that, again, I talked about in these wealthier postcodes around the city centers, we don't have any density. And so, huge land potential where you should have on main arterials, you should have high density. You've got buses, you've got trains, you've got all that transit where density should be. And we have so many of those examples in Auckland where there's just single family or very large homes, and there's that land use is not the best use, or they put up a duplex on the land. So I think there's a really key thing here is looking at where should the density be, why should it be there, and what are we doing to make sure that we don't waste land potential. I battle this at City Hall every day where we've got land near transit, and I'm not allowed to put what I think should be put in there. So that's the conversation about how do we have a conversation about, I could build it as a developer, but is that actually the best use? Is that the right thing to do? So key takeaways for me, obviously in BC, we've got to open up land supply. We have to address the supply and demand challenge that we have in our market. It's creating further and further unaffordability. I would say that, as a developer, I'm hand in hand with a homeowner on this one. Like, I don't make more money because it takes long to develop. I don't make more money if I don't have supply. The only person who wins out of that is the banks, because I pay more interest, and I got to charge that to my homeowners in order to to recover my costs. So, we're aligned with the homeowner population. It's not developers against homeowners by any stretch of the imagination. But I guess I implore to all industry professionals that we have to look at other markets and analogous markets like New Zealand. There's probably many others in North America that we could look at. And we need to analyze what's worked and what hasn't worked. BC has some unique characteristics, but other people have done this. Other people have done it well, and other people have done it poorly. So I really think that we need, as an industry, need to be looking at, and this land summit is a great opportunity coming up to start thinking about what has worked on land supply, land use in other markets. What can we bring to BC? What's best practice, and how do we implement that? And then the other side is, what should we not be doing? And so I think it's really important as an industry. That's kind of the key takeaway is, let's make sure that we look around the world to similar markets to make sure that as we do this smarter, and we can make sure that we do this in the right way for the future population of BC. So I'll leave it there and take some questions.
Great. Thanks, Graham. Really interesting to hear about New Zealand. I'm lucky to get there back in 2016, and it was surprised at how similar it was to BC, so I can see the parallels that you're drawing there, even just in terms of geography. I'll check the chat here. So I'll just remind everybody, if you can ask questions in the chat, that would be great, and I will pose them to our experts today. While we're waiting for those, Graham, in terms of the NIMBYism comment, whenever we get on these calls, usually it's a group of professionals that work in land that are not NIMBYers. We all kind of want this progress and this affordability, and maybe we don't all want density in our backyard. But I'm wondering how New Zealand has addressed that, if there's any insights that you can share, or are they just in a similar situation as we are at the moment?
Well, as I kind of had in my comments, I think New Zealand's actually done a pretty poor job of that. I think there needs to be some leadership shown at political and municipal levels. I'll never forget the mayor of Burnaby coming on TV one day saying that, if you live within 5 blocks of Metro Town, I'm putting towers and move out, but I'm not going to touch your neighborhoods outside of that. And for me, that's the kind of leadership. Ian, I can't remember the mayor's name who did that, but we need some political, I guess, allies, but we also need the municipal leaders to stand up. And as an industry, we need to support that, where we have to kind of draw some lines in the sand as to what is the best for the greater good of our communities. And I think New Zealand hasn't done a good job of that. As I say, around the city of Auckland, we've got so many downtown areas where there should be high rises, there should be multifamily, and we just have single family homes. So I think it's an ongoing challenge. I think a lot of consultation with the communities. Obviously, if you have a $5 million home, you don't necessarily want to have 8-story tower or a 20-story tower right beside you, but there's some challenging conversations that have to be had. And again, it's a challenging one, but I think as a community, we have to come together and figure out how to crack the nut, because it's really important that on the arterials we have density.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. In the chat here, I've got a question for you, Graham. Graham, can you offer an overview of how municipalities are organized in New Zealand versus BC, and how planning decisions are made?
Yeah, so the only caveat is I've done development in BC and Lower Mainland and on the island, so I've kind of only got a couple of data points in terms of the process. I find the process here to be far too long. In New Zealand, you can get a building permit for, you can go through a rezoning, development permit equivalent, and a building permit in about 8 to 12 months. So, here it takes, it can be up to two to 3 years, depending on what municipality you're in. I think, what New Zealand's done well from a planning perspective, I think, is that, if you, what I call color between the lines, if you meet the requirements of the zoning that you have, it's a very, very fast process. It's almost a checkbox. You've met the requirements, you're within the bounds of what's been allowed, off you go and build whatever you want to build.
Gotcha.
And I think here there's a much more process around, even if you color between the lines, it's still a long, drawn out process. So, as I talked about, we don't win from a long process. We want to build homes, and we want to get homeowners and homes and just carry on. So I think that's definitely a huge example. I think one of the comments just came up, in Australia, in New South Wales, they have one government department that does the entire state of New South Wales, and all they do is planning approvals. So again, one of the challenges that we have in our market is a good planner at the city of Vancouver moves to the city of Nanaimo because they get paid 50 grand more, and off they go. And there's just a revolving door of planners. So there needs to be some thought around how do we stop that happening. And obviously, from an individual point of view, you understand it, but how as an industry can we be more efficient with approvals? If you've gone through a community process and a consultation process and you color between the lines, you should be able to build your building in a much quicker environment, in my opinion. So trying to figure out how to do that is, again, we need some leadership at council, municipality level, as well as political and industry.
Thank you for that answer. We have another one in here. What are parking trends comparable between New Zealand and BC? Are you seeing any use of car share programs that are becoming increasingly popular in Canada as parking ratios are reduced?
No, I think that's a business opportunity in New Zealand, to be honest. I don't know of one car share program. I'd say in Auckland, the three big cities in New Zealand are Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch. Wellington has a very good public transit system, trains, buses. Auckland, they're actually in the process of building an underground, like a SkyTrain equivalent, which will meet about 1/8 of the city. So it's really not going to be that wide. The bus system's okay, but not great. So everybody has cars. I think due to cost of construction, there's a very, very, most multifamily do not have underground parkades like they do here. Generally you'd have some at grade parking or at street parking. So congestion on the roads is a huge issue. And I think car share is a fantastic, something that's needed badly in New Zealand. And I think, actually Vancouver specifically has been one of the world leaders in car share programs. So there's some opportunities for New Zealand on that side. But I think, it's a huge issue. And as we know in the development community, parking kills so many projects, parking requirements.
Yeah.
But in downtown Vancouver, it's cost, right? Like you build 3 levels of parking, that adds a huge cost to your building.
Definitely. Now, just kind of want to tie Graham and Robert together here on a question. Robert, you mentioned about how everybody's fighting for land. You're fighting with the industrial people. It's a high cost. Graham, same thing. Multifamily. You want the land, but then they won't give you the density to be able to get it. To get back the returns that are required in order to satisfy investors. I'm wondering, is there a future here where there could be a mishmash of uses that is not typical, something that is a self-storage and multifamily style project, especially since, Robert, you made comments around, you require self-storage close to higher density. And if Graham's going to put the higher density, is there a mixed use type site that might be out there? And maybe you guys in your expertise have seen that somewhere in the market.
Yeah. It's still pretty pioneering. Across North America, you don't have too many of those examples, but it is occurring. And that's just because of the price point. It's forcing us to look elsewhere. I've been working with different developers on conceptual storage where we put that into the building on certain levels. it is challenging still, even at the cost per square foot to build for there. It's a much higher cost than what I'm used to. Of course, that's the problem, right? You want to get into those areas because you know there's demand. And it's then a matter of, can we get the rate to where we need it to work. So it's in the early stages, North America wide, but I can tell you, very successful people have figured it out in Los Angeles and New York, where they're a little more ahead of it. They had to be. So we do need to continue to work together, and I know we're going to figure it out and see it happen.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'd echo those comments. You think, like kind of Rob said, it's tough to make the numbers work, but we need innovation in our industry, especially in the Lower Mainland. I use the example a lot of the big Vancouver developers that went to San Diego and bought all the old strip malls and put housing, retail at grade and housing. They all made tons of money. And so they brought innovation to a market that had no innovation, and they were able to buy these strip malls at a cap rate of, whatever the strip mall owners, and they weren't thinking about multifamily and density. So we need that innovation again in our market. And I think BC's got a very unique market, I think, in North America, in a lot of respects. So, again, as an industry, I welcome partnerships, I welcome discussions with industry groups, because I think we need to work together. Like, there's enough ability to develop, to go around. Like, we can all win in this. So how do we work together? And I think, well, I know from my development companies, a lot of them don't work together very well. And I think, we need to work together as an industry to solve some of these challenges, because they're not going away. They're just getting more and more painful.
Yeah. Thank you guys for the answer. We have a question here in the chat. Says, any Aboriginal land reconciliation and development examples in New Zealand? I know the haka dance is a national treasure for New Zealand.
Yeah, that's a kind of a long answer to that question. New Zealand, the Aboriginal, the Maori people, the Aboriginal people of New Zealand, I think they're far more integrated into daily life in New Zealand, I think, than, if I can say that in a broad statement. We have a Maori party in our government, and so we have representation at the federal level, essentially, as well as at the municipal level. So the haka is a great example. As a kid, when I'm in school, I learn Maori as part of the curriculum. So it's a much more integrated system, I guess. So we've had Aboriginal land claims. A lot of them have been resolved, I would say. We had a I guess New Zealand had a war and had a treaty, and so there was, out of that treaty kind of flowed a lot of the claims, which is a little bit different in BC from what I understand of the history. So I think it's an interesting question. There's certainly been huge amounts of development on Maori land, and there's been many great examples of developers working with the Maori people to help further their land and make best use of their land as well. So you see that starting a little bit in the Lower Mainland, where I do see that starting now, or happening more and more. And obviously it's very welcome to find a way to work together. And again, we're all in the same boat, so we're all one people, and let's work together to I guess to move forward.
Right. Thanks, Graham. There's a comment more than a question here that somebody's saying, I think the lack of storage is a barrier to more people moving to condo apartment developments. And just to build off that a little bit, Robert, I remember a few years back seeing a few municipalities that were removing self-storage from their zoning uses. And it seems like an easy target. People view it as it's a low employment center, but in fact, if you view it as an area where business is bringing and using storage, it may be the opposite, actually quite benefiting employment. I'm wondering, when those conversations were happening at the municipal table, what were your groups and the associations? What is it that you're typically doing to try and dissuade them from that?
Yeah, it's a tough battle. I quite often find that policy happens and they're speaking to the absolute wrong people, and it's not on the radar, and then it's like, oh my God, it happened, or it's too late, it's too far down the road. That the Association of Storage, we're all competitors, but we work together for the greater good. And definitely, again, if anyone took the time to go to an urban storage facility in the morning, the amount of jobs being supported indirectly through the businesses that need that service in the core is it's in your face. Like, it's just shocking. Even I've been in the industry for 40 years. When I go to our Burnaby location near Gilmore and Willingdon, my jaw hits the ground just watching the commercial activity. And so, then when you go to an area in Victoria, for example, through COVID, where space was locked, like you couldn't, people couldn't even move into the region because they couldn't solve both the rental or purchase or storage solutions. Obviously, the speed of growth in that community is got a huge constraint. And I think we in that region, actually, we're feeling that constraint now. As things loosen up, we're feeling the difference between Nanaimo and Victoria. Nanaimo could grow, Victoria was stuck. And so, and when it's stuck, it takes a year. You feel the unravel for years later, right? Here we're a couple of years, we're a year out of COVID easily, and we're still feeling the unraveling of that lack of growth at that particular time. And so I think it's all linked together. So when you have lack of one thing, it does inadvertently cause another problem. And I'm definitely not a fan of the moratoriums and the restrictive use. And it's actually funny because that type of policy causes a rush to the door of storage that didn't meet the feasibility of natural laws of supply and demand. It just races in, and then it causes a whole other problem in like one thin corridor where it was allowed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
On that same theme there, the theme of the webinar and the conversation today is unlocking opportunities, and we haven't touched too much on technology, but where warehouses and distribution warehouses have moved to automated robotics, picking and whatnot, is there anywhere, or are there markets where prices in self-storage are getting to the point where actually having robotics go and pick your smaller unit and bring it down to you? Is that contemplated, or?
Oh, you know what? So I just came from our like sort of the world's largest storage conference, which is hilarious. 4,000 really geeky, passionate storage individuals in one conference hall. And we do talk about robotics and different things we can do for delivery from home to facility, for robotics and racking systems. There are a couple examples where you have it's almost like cargo carriers that would be inside a 747, but they contain your goods. They're being shipped from house to facility, and the facility, you can't enter as a person. You have a very nice loading area and area where you can go through stuff, but the containers actually go through a mechanical system similar to a mechanical parking garage in Japan. So there is that. I think that's still a little far out. It's very complicated, some of those systems, but simple robotics of wayfinding, using AI and AI devices to do sales is really, I think, going to be appearing all over the place in the coming years, because it's just so much more reliable and it's very effective, and people don't even know it's AI. So we do talk about it definitely from a cleaning and security perspective of robot sentries or robot cleaning. That's happening. Yeah. So storage is, it sort of looks like, what can you do with that box? But there are a lot of advancements, and they're consumer driven. Consumers want it. They want that simplicity and ease. A person at the end of the day just they want a storage place that's close to where they work or live, and they want it to be clean and secure. They want to feel safe there, and they want to know that their stuff is still there when they come back. And it's that simple. So you can't force it into weird places.
Yeah. Thank you. So I see we only have about 5 minutes left here, so I'm just gonna check the chat, see if anybody else has any additional questions. If not, I've got one last one for Graham here. All right, so maybe I'll go to mine. So Graham, you've got projects on the go, projects that have recently completed. You're in City Hall trying to get things through. I'm wondering if you can leave us with a bit of a general perspective on the concept of community investment and developing land. And when you're in there talking to the municipalities, what is it? What is the big stumbling block? Is it the red tape that the people are dealing with? Is it people themselves or administration themselves that don't want to see the project, or where is it? And I know that's a massive loaded question that could be its own webinar. So if you want to pick and choose what piece you can answer, that would be great.
So repeat the question back to you, just, what is the biggest stumbling block to getting stuff built?
Yeah, stumbling block to getting stuff built, but also from your development perspective, you recognize, okay, I know the consumer, I know what needs to be built here. What is it that's preventing your vision that's from taking place typically?
I guess it really depends on the municipality you're working in. I think it varies greatly. We've got a project out in Chilliwack where there's a lot less red tape than a project in Vancouver. I'll give an example of a project in Vancouver. We have a piece of land near the Commercial Drive SkyTrain station, which is, I think it's the second busiest SkyTrain station in the province. We're right by a Safeway, which is the busiest Safeway in Western Canada. Due to political reasons and red tape, that site is zoned for 10 stories. And I've gone to City Hall, and we've got a different council and mayor in there. And I said, I can build 10 stories there, no problem, but I'm actually doing a disservice to the city because that site should be 20, 30 stories. And yes, I have a vested interest as a developer, but that's actually the right thing for the site because of its location within 50 meters of a very major SkyTrain station. So for me, I think it's kind of, it's red tape. And I think generally the city staff and planners want to do the right thing and they see that, but they're handcuffed with process. So I think we kind of got ourselves down this path of we've got too much process and we haven't really stepped back and had a look at how do we do this in the most efficient manner. So I mean, I see that time and time again in different municipalities that I work in is just, what makes sense and what's the right thing. And so it should be, well, how do we build that? But it's not how do we get to yes, it's how do we get to no. And so we have to figure out a way of how do we get to yes to move forward. And that's the only way to unlock and do developments. And as I said, before, like I'm aligned with a homeowner or end user, right? Like I don't make more money because it takes long. It's cost the homeowner at the end of the day. It's the banks that make the money. And so, we need to work together.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that answer and for taking that question on, actually. So it's also a good segue here, just as a reminder for everybody that's on the call that today's call was put on by the BC Land Summit Society, and the conversations that you heard today, I mean, you've seen them in newspapers. It's great to have experts address them, but also we hope that many of you will be able to join for the Land Summit itself in Nanaimo next year, May 8th through 10th. Should be a great opportunity. It's one of those rare times where you've just got everybody collaborating so nicely, from planners, appraisers, developers, architects in a room, and many other professions. So I hope you take the time to check it out. And if you have any questions, go to the website that was included in previous links. And again, thank you so much, Rob and Graham, for the great webinar and insights. And thank you as well to everybody for attending today.
Thank you.